Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I am talking about England's Screaming by Sean Hogan, and this is from PS Publishing. That is not what that looks like on the spine, but I can't read it. What does this say? That says PS Electric Dream House, an imprint of PS Publishing. That's why it didn't look like PS Publishing. Anyway, look at that cover. Holy crap. Is that amazing? Cover art by Graham Humphreys. Cover design by Michael Smith. Beautiful stuff. Well, I have no idea how to describe this book, and so I am going to try to read at least a little bit of the flap here. What connects Duke de Richelieu from The Devil Rides Out, Julian Carswell from Night of the Demon, and Damien Thorne, The Omen? Carol Ladeau, Repulsion, and Dr. Chenard, Hellbound Hellraiser 2. Joe Gilkes, Beast, from Beast. How is Carswell linked to Hugo Fitch, Dead of Night, and Emily Underwood from Beyond the Grave? To the deaths, what connects Dorothy Yates from Frightmare to the deaths at Russell Square, Deathline? How and why does Damien Thorne know Julia Cotton, Hellraiser? It's a common thread of film criticism to note the influence and precursors of one film to another, especially in relation to genre. By definition, genre films are connected by a frame. What then if the characters could see each other? What if they existed not only as fictional characters in our world, but in a single chronology of their own? What if they could talk to each other, know each other, love and hate each other? Who would align with whom, and what might we discover about how influences breed? What might we then learn about the warp and weft of our beloved genre and the patterns that are woven through it? Absorbing it all, Sean Hogan steps inside the world of UK horror to examine it from within, to see how the characters, themes, and stories interact and what the bigger picture might reveal. Is there a story behind and between the stories we already know? What might it say about the history of UK horror and the culture from which it was spawned? All right, hopefully that made sense. All right, so first of all, for the too long didn't watch crowd, I gave this 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved this book. It came out in 2021, I believe, 2020, and I've had it since then, but I was afraid to read it. I was scared. It was intimidating. But my friend Kaylee Dobbs of Happy Goat Horror interviewed Sean Hogan, and so when I was looking for something to read, couldn't decide, I was like, let's pick that up and give it a try. And I am so glad I did. I didn't want to put it down. So, 5 out of 5. What we have here is it's really difficult to describe. I don't know if it's considered a novel. It's not really a short story collection. It's a biography and a history. Basically, each chapter is a movie character, but again, as it said in the flap, as if they were real people in the real world. Now, there is an author's preface that says there's some tricks with time, maybe a little time compression, because things didn't line up perfectly with like release dates of the films and what time they were taking place in. He mentions the fact that I guess the first 3 Omen movies came out over 5 years, but Damien ages 30 years or however many. So he plays a little bit with time, and he does kind of smush some characters together, but he has explanations for that. An actor played or somebody played this character in this movie, and he's saying it's the same person. They just happened to change their name, and then the events of this movie happened. Hopefully, again, it's really difficult I think, for me to explain what's going on here. But, so, what we have, each chapter is a character, and even though this is meant to be, a true story, however you want to look at it, or at least within these movies, it gives us the character's name, a photograph of the character, who played them, in what movie, the year it came out, written by, based on a novel by, if that's the case, and directed by. So, just for example, the very first chapter is the Duke. I do not know how to pronounce this except, I think, the Richelieu part. Duke de Richelieu. Christopher Lee in The Devil Rides Out, 1968, written by Richard Matheson, master of the genre, based on the novel by Dennis Wheatley, directed by Terence Fisher. So, what he does in this chapter is gives us sort of a biography of the character. And that includes the events of The Devil Rides Out. But it also includes the character meeting Julian Carswell from Night of the Demon, and leading up to, this is going to be hopefully the only time I get any spoilery at all, but leading up to Richelieu being in the hospital where, and on the night that Damien, where Damien Thorne is born. Damien Thorne. And so he's tied in right off the bat. And I can't remember if there might be even other things he's tied into that I just don't remember. But tied into, obviously, The Devil Rides Out, because that's where he's from. Night of the Demon, Julian Carswell, and the Omen series. And so, we get that. Then next up is Hugo Fitch, which is a ventriloquist dummy. And so then we get the story of, what's the movie? Dead of Night, as well as some other stuff. Again, I'm going to try to avoid so many spoilers. But it's all of this is just tying together all of these disparate movies and disparate characters, tying them together, little threads connecting them. In the back is a list of not only the movies that are specifically listed, because the characters are the ones he's talking about in each chapter, but every movie that is referenced. And the most recent movie is from 2015, and I forgot to check before I started this video, but a quick look. Dead of Night is from 1945. That might be so far. Try not to take up all of our time just looking at this. So I'm scanning very quickly, so I might miss something, but it does look like 1945 is the oldest film. Yes. So the movies themselves range from 1945 to 2015. And there's made-for-TV movies. There's a PSA movie that he ties in an amazing way, that I don't want to go into the details, because I cannot recommend this book highly enough for horror fans, for horror movie fans, British horror movie fans. I will just throw out a couple of the other titles that are in the book without trying not to give anything away. An American Werewolf in London. That's in here. One of the characters from that gets a chapter. Let's see. Of course, the 3 Omen movies. Hellraiser and Hellbound Hellraiser 2. Straw Dogs, the original. The Quatermass Experiment. And, well, Village of the Damned. Anyway, I have never Googled so much while reading a book as I did with this book. And it did not bother me at all because I wasn't looking up things I didn't understand. There were points. Sometimes I immediately recognized a character and knew what they were from. But sometimes there's so many movies in here that I've never seen but know about. And so a name would pop up and I would say, I think that's this character from this movie, and I would Google it just to make sure. And then sometimes you're reading about a character. This is their life. This is how they grew up. You've gotten to the part that's basically the movie that they're in, but it continues. It goes beyond the events of that movie, and then I'm like, oh, I think now we're in a different movie. They mention something. I can Google that. Oh yeah, now we're sort of, that character has moved into a different movie. Again, I hope this isn't confusing. And if you look at the cover, oh, Dracula, freaking Dracula is in this movie. And you can see some skinned, I don't know, there's kind of two Hellraiser things going on here. But I think a lot of people will recognize that image. And of course, Damien Thorne all grown up. So I will say, Julian Carswell, since I've already mentioned him, is probably the most mentioned character in the book, followed closely by Damien Thorne, and then a character with two names, and they very clearly say this was their name, and then they changed their name to this. Although I think it might be the other way around. We know them by one name, and then someone later is like, you used to go by this other name, didn't you? And both characters played by Christopher Lee. I think he's the most prominent actor in here, because he starts us off with Count de Richelieu. He's this character that goes by two names from, and I'll mention the movies, Scream and Scream Again and Deathline. Of course, he was Dracula in the Dracula movies they're talking about, and he may be in others that I'm just not recalling at the time. So, yes, the time frame jumps around a little bit, but it all eventually ties together. So this story goes from point A to point B. The next story might start sort of in this part of the timeline from the first story and then move beyond to point C, if that makes sense. So, again, an intricate web. I imagine Sean Hogan with a serial killer hunter's string board where he's got all these things, pictures and notes from all these movies and yarn, tying everything together. The crazy thing is there's a sequel, which I've also had since it was published, and it has absolutely moved up on my TBR pile. I think it's even thicker than this. I think that's called Twilight's Last Screaming. But, yeah. So, let me calm down. England's Screaming by Sean Hogan from PS Publishing is a 5 out of 5 stars book that takes all of these British horror movies and ties them together with a narrative string running through the stories and the characters. And it is an amazingly written story. Again, it doesn't quite, there's not a lot of dialogue here. It doesn't quite read like a novel. It would be closer to a mosaic novel, I suppose. So a bunch of short stories that all form a larger whole. But it also kind of feels like biographies of the characters, because it's not quite written as short stories. Oh, and there are a couple stories that change up the narrative, or the way they're written. There's one that's basically epistolary. The main character is an author, and so there's at least one book review. So there's some newspaper articles, things from newspapers or magazines. There are journal entries, and so that story is told differently. And I think there's at least one more that's told. It might be a recording of a conversation or something. So most of the stories are sort of told in that same way. Oh, yeah, there's another Christopher Lee character, Lord Summerisle from The Wicker Man. Which, the thing it ties into, fantastic. So just amazing. It's an amazing, amazing book. One of those books, I really wish I would have read it earlier, so then I could reread it now. I mean, technically I could. Nothing's stopping me from immediately rereading it, but that would be crazy talk. But 5 years, that wouldn't be so bad. Rereading it after 5 years. Anyway, England's Screaming Sean Hogan, 5 out of 5 stars. Third time I've said all of that, and I don't feel like I've said it enough. This is absolutely going to be in the top 10 books I've read this year, unless something crazy happens and some stuff comes out. I've read some good books this year, but unless some crazy shit comes out that just blows me away, and we do have quite a bit of the year left, but I can't imagine that this isn't going to be in the top 10, my favorite books that I read this year. And there you go. So, and I will have links to buy this in the description below, of course, as I always do. I just mentioned that because, man, I can't recommend this enough. It's so good. Question for this video: what do you think of this concept? Nice, easy question. I suppose. Obviously, I'm a fan. But people know I like mashups and crossovers. Regular viewers, I think, know that kind of thing. I like alternate history kinds of things. I've read books where a bunch of authors will get together and throw their characters together. So you'll have all these different, like, mystery characters, detectives and stuff. And they all happen to be on the same cruise where a murder happens. I like that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of thing that could be done with American films. It could be done simply with slashers. Finding these little things that are going to tie all these slasher movies together somehow. So I think it's a great concept. Again, I can't wait to read the sequel. I'm going to have to, because it's a pretty big sucker, and I need to get some other reading done, or I'm not going to have any books to review and put up on my YouTube channel. But I think the question was, what do you think of this idea? Yeah, I dig it. I'd love to see it done with other subgenres of horror, or even if someone could take just every horror movie ever made. Not literally every horror movie ever made, but not break it down into this is just British films, but take every subgenre of horror film and maybe the best of those subgenres and tie them together with the right author. It's going to work. Let me know what you think. Basically, what do you think of this idea? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links to my Instagram and Bluesky in the description below. That's all I've got. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, a very excitable Eric Smith. Until next time, read more books.